In this week's video, I want to talk about making mistakes and what to do when it happens. Justin here with Succeeded IT. In this channel, I want to help you start and grow your career in IT into something you love and to create the success you want. Let's get into it. So at the time that I'm making this video, HalfLife Alex was just announced, and I am super excited about this. This is a little digression here, but I am so excited, and I'm also really happy that they didn't call it Half-Life 3, because if they called it Half-Life 3, the hype train would be like out of control. The expectations would be too high, and it would just be automatically a failure because people would be like so hyped up about it. So the fact that they call it Half-Life Alex I think is awesome, and the fact that it's VR is going to be incredible, and I kind of feel like I'm going to have to build a VR rig just to play this game, but we'll see. So anyway, we're here to talk about mistakes. Mistakes are inevitable. They're gonna happen no matter what. It's how you handle the mistake that sets you apart from everybody else. So the first thing you need to do when you make a mistake is to own it. Okay, you need to admit to yourself that you made a mistake, you messed up, and you have to take ownership of that. This is huge. A lot of people have trouble even just fessing up to the fact that they've made a mistake. So the first thing you have to do is just get over that hurdle, own it. You made a mistake, life goes on. Now let's see how we can fix it. After you've admitted that you've made a mistake, the next thing that I usually do is I like to ask myself whether or not this is an emergency or not. So what qualifies as an emergency? Typically speaking, an emergency is a situation where your production environment is down, meaning the computers or the systems that are required for the company to run are not functioning correctly. That is an emergency. Additionally, an emergency could be maybe something with security, or like a ransomware attack or virus attack, anything that is going to penetrate the network and again, affect your company's production. There's probably some other situations that should be considered an emergency, but this is going to be up to your discretion to determine when it happens. So what do you do when you mess up and it's an emergency? The first thing that I do is I contact my boss or whomever this is affecting. You need to do this immediately, admit that you made a mistake, apologize, and communicate to the fact that you are doing everything you can to correct the mistake. Additionally, you should try to communicate what the impact of this mistake is so that everybody involved knows what's the outcome if this doesn't get fixed. As you're working on correcting this, you're going to want to also communicate thoroughly, ongoing, with your team, with your boss, of what the new updates are and what's happening next so that everybody's on the same page. You're also going to want to find help in any way that you can. So if this is something that's going on with an infrastructure system or maybe a software system, contact the vendor, contact support, bring them involved as quickly as possible, and make sure you have as many resources available to you helping you as quickly as possible. Of course, you got to solve the problem as quickly as possible. And after the problem is solved, now you can take a deep breath and take a step back. At this point, you're going to want to write down how it happened, what the impact was, as well as what you learned and what you're going to do to ensure that this never happens again. It's really tough when you make a mistake, and it's really hard to own sometimes. I've made a few mistakes in my career, and there's been some that have had huge impacts, and there's been some that have just been embarrassing. And it's kind of funny because the embarrassing ones are the ones that I had the hardest time apologizing for. Like one time I was asked if I could move a printer from one location to another location on a school campus, and I didn't realize how heavy the printer was. I thought it was just a normal black and white inkjet printer, like a HP LaserJet printer. And so I said, I'll just carry it. They were going to bring a dolly, and I said, don't bring the dolly. I'll just grab the printer and I'll carry it across the school. It's no big deal. Well, I picked up the printer, and it was actually a huge workhorse color printer. And I picked it up, and I was kind of like straining, and the blood is rushing to my head. And my colleague goes, "Are you okay?" And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. And And then I should have just said no and put it back down. But my ego, I was so young, my ego was like frail. And if I put it down, then I don't know, it just was embarrassing or whatever. Well, even worse, I ended up dropping the printer in the middle of the hallway. I had complete fatigue, my arms gave out. I dropped the printer, pieces go everywhere. My boss then had to replace this printer, which was like a $700 or $800 printer. And I was so embarrassed. It took me like a week to apologize. And after that, I realized it's better to just own it and apologize right away. Now, if it's not an emergency, that's really good. Take a deep breath and just take your time on resolving this. So here's what you do. Figure out what's the impact of this mistake. Then figure out how it happened and what you learned. Then determine how you're going to go about solving the problem. And lastly, what are you going to do to ensure that this mistake never happens again? Now, write all of those down. Once you have everything written down and you've thought about it a little bit more thoroughly because it's not an emergency, you can then communicate with your boss or whomever it concerns that you made a mistake, apologize for the mistake, and then you can automatically just go right into how it happened, what you're going to do to fix it, and what you're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again, etc., etc. It's going to look really good on you if you go to your boss with all of this information already ready, and you can just say, look, I messed up, but here's what we're going to do, here's how I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again, etc. And of course, make sure you solve the problem. So sometimes mistakes happen and it's not your fault. Isn't that great? I don't know. It's still a mistake, and it still needs to be fixed. So it's not your fault necessarily, but I want to talk about how to handle a situation where somebody else makes a mistake. Maybe one of your colleagues makes a mistake. First of all, don't point fingers. Do not say, oh, it wasn't me, it was Joe, I didn't do it, because this is a bad behavior. It's common that people want to take the light away from themselves. So maybe you made a small mistake, and that led to another person making a larger mistake. And now you don't want anybody to focus on the fact that you made a small mistake, so you're pointing the fingers at the person that made the large mistake. It's human nature, and try not to do this because this kind of behavior is going to hurt you and your team in the long run. Instead, try to imagine what it would be like if you were the one that made the mistake. Wouldn't you want your coworkers to back you up? And that's what you need to do. You need to show your coworkers that you are supporting them. You guys are a team. This goes a long way too, especially when you're talking to the business or other people that maybe aren't on your team. Sometimes people will come in and they'll say, oh, I'm so mad at Joe because Joe messed up, and don't you hate Joe? And you could easily be like, yeah, Joe's the worst, I hate Joe, God. But now you're throwing your buddy under the bus, and this is gonna come around and bite you later. So instead, let's just recognize that they made the mistake, and if it impacts something that you're doing, just tell them, hey, I think that this is gonna impact this other thing. You can work as a team and, rise above that and solve the problem as quickly as possible. This goes a long way with your colleagues, this goes a long way with your boss, and this is gonna go a long way in your career. So support your colleagues, because after all, it could be you next time. Just remember that mistakes are going to happen, and how you handle the mistakes is what's going to set you apart from everybody else. Don't let it get to you. It's tough when it happens, but try not to let it weigh on you. It's inevitable, and you just got to power through it. I would love to hear about a time that you've made a mistake down in the comments. That would be really cool. And if you have any other questions or any other things you want to comment on, please let me know. Give my videos some likes. I'd love for more people to find them. I love doing these videos. And subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell. I have a new video coming out every Tuesday. And I'll see you next week.